Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about SmartConnect and in particular about the REST connector for SmartConnect. Today's going to have a little bit slightly different flavor than traditional SmartConnect demos that you may have attended in the past. We won't be going through the setting up of an entire integration, which we will do actually later today at, I think it's 2 o'clock Eastern. But what we will be going through is the setup of a REST connector using our SmartConnect.com. I do have a few slides I'd like to go through, just a couple of overview slides, and then we'll dive right into the demo. And then we will come back, we'll do a couple more slides. Now I do have Q&A listed as the last item here, but I'm pretty informal, so if you guys do come up with questions, I have unmuted everybody at the bottom of the screen. Jess, I have unmuted you. Can you please let me know if you can hear me? I have somebody saying that they can't hear me, and I've done a lot of talking.
Rad.
Hey, Jess. I do hear you. Hi there, Jess. Can you hear me now? Hi, Tim. I've unmuted you. Can you hear me? Hi there, Jess. Are you able to hear me now? Jess? All right, thank you to Mick for letting me know that you've been able to hear me. I'm going to go ahead and present and assume that everyone can hear me. I do apologize for this brief delay. What I was saying was I have unmuted each of you from my end, which means if you guys do have questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask them as opposed to raising your hand or what have you. You can also use the questions box, which is part of the GoToWebinar. All right, so real quick, let's move on to the next slide. So what is SmartConnect? SmartConnect, these are basically what we call the 4 layers of SmartConnect. If you notice the top and the bottom, we've got data sources and destinations, and those 2 layers are pretty much the same thing. You'll find that most of our connectors, our out-of-the-box connectors, can be used as both data sources and data destinations, meaning we can read from and write to. In some cases, you might find that the data source is also the destination, depending what you're doing with the data. For example, if Business Central was your data source, let's say that when you set up a new employee, you also want to set up a vendor record so that when you pay that employee's expenses, you can do it through their vendor record as opposed to through their payroll. You can have SmartConnect watch for new employees and automatically create those vendors to take away that duplicate entry. Okay, what we like to say is you should be able to draw a line from any of those data sources all the way down to your destinations and back up again. Okay, sitting in between those, we have triggers. Triggers are basically saying, when do I want this map to run? What do I want to cause this map to run? Okay, the most obvious ones are you can schedule our maps, our processes, or you can have users execute them manually. When we say manually, not just through the front end, we do also have an Excel add-in, which we show in some of our other demos, where users can actually manipulate data inside of Excel and then automatically execute a map from that Excel workbook, never having to leave the workbook itself. Okay, we also have in many cases real-time or change triggers. Real-time is as soon as the user clicks on save in their system, it is going to kick off a map that will process that data somewhere else. That's available in systems like Salesforce or CRM, GP, a couple others. Okay, change track is what has changed about my data since the last time I ran my map. Okay, so if you don't need a real-time map, but you do want to get your customers, your accounts from Business Central to your accounts from CRM to Business Central, for example, you might schedule that map to run every half hour and just look for any customer changes that have happened in the past half hour. Okay, lastly, there are web service APIs and external calls that you can make to SmartConnect to execute maps. Okay. The next layer here is the transformation, and that's kind of the magic of SmartConnect. That's where you can take your source data, which probably is not formatted the same way as your destination data. Maybe there's some logic that needs to be applied to it, some calculations, even some translations. All of those, the ability to manipulate that source data and make it match your destination's requirements is essential, and it's actually pretty simple here in SmartConnect. SmartConnect is offered in two different deployment models. Okay, the first deployment model is SmartConnect on-premise. That's where you install it on your network somewhere. You need a SQL Server implementation for that. The other is SmartConnect.com, which is actually what we'll be looking at today. So that is our full SaaS product. Simply sign up, log in, and you're good to go. All right, without further ado, let's jump right into our demo. So as I mentioned before, this is SmartConnect.com. And I want to show you real quick a bulk data source that's using a REST connector. Okay, so I'm going to go with a query here. Okay, notice here I've got this without wire data source. Now, without wire is a partner of ours. We work with them fairly closely, and they do have a REST connection, a REST API available. So what we've done, I've configured a couple of their nodes, which we're going to walk through today. Okay, this one is the on-hand inventory. Okay, so when I come into this data source, the first thing to notice is from an end user standpoint, it doesn't look any different from any other data source. Okay, it gets listed in with our connections. Okay, the nodes available are listed right here from a group standpoint, and then I choose which entity I'm choosing. In this case, it's inventory on hand. So if I click on validate, it's going to go out and it's going to check against the REST connection. I'm going to show you in a couple minutes how we went about setting that up. Okay, so right now it says it's successful, so I should be able to preview this and see I'm pulling from without wire a by warehouse inventory on hand, okay, by item. So let's go ahead and close that up. So you can see here that this REST connection that I'm going to show you how to set up can be used as a data source. let's go take a look at an existing process as well, where it's being used as a destination. Okay, so here we're taking NetSuite. We're going to push a customer from NetSuite to Without Wire. Okay, let's go ahead and modify that so I can show it to you. So while this is opening, again, this Without Wire is something that wasn't inherent in SmartConnect. It's one that we defined manually. This one that we created. Their API is actually fairly well documented here. Okay, you can see here if I scroll down, if I scroll up, here it is, inventory methods. Here's that inventory export that I was just showing you a second ago. Okay, this is where they've got it documented. And here's where, for example, I'm going to get information about how to call this REST API. So when you guys are working with REST APIs, the documentation of it is actually really important. Okay, so before you start kind of going down the path, take a look and see what kind of documentation they have available to you, because you're going to use that a fair bit when you're configuring your REST connection. So Mick, the API connection is a little bit different in the on-premise. I believe we do have a pretty decent document on how to set that up, and I would be happy to talk to you offline on the actual setup of a REST connection for the on-premise product. The screens are just a little bit different for now. We're in the process of making them the same as what I'm about to show you, but there's a little bit of difference there. Okay, so we should be loaded up on our process here. Now, if you take a look at our target, again, Without Wire is showing up as a target. Okay, and now I can choose my group of customers, and in this case, I'm importing customers. Okay, that's my customer import action. When I take a look at it, it looks exactly the same as any other destination would in SmartConnect. For example, I've got my customer, I've got my shipping addresses, which can be a list of more than one. Okay, when I come into my integration and I look at my target integration, all of my target columns are listed here. Okay, and then if I go to my addresses, again, they're all listed here with data types. So to the user who's building the maps, these don't look any different than anything else. Okay, so how do we set all of that up? What does it look like? Well, first we're going to go to maintenance, or we're going to go to REST services. Okay, when I'm in REST services, you can see here I've got my Without Wire REST service that I created. Okay, I'm going to edit this guy. Now, silly little thing, but it's kind of fun. You can upload an image, an icon, so that your users aren't faced with the little curly brackets that are normally there by default. Okay, so I uploaded the Without Wire logo, pulled it off their website right here. Okay, now the first thing we have to identify is what is the base URL? Okay, so for every REST connection, you're going to have a URL, and that's this guy here. Okay, so when I'm looking at this, for every call that I make to the Without Wire connector, it's going to use this api.withoutwire.com/integration as the base. After that second slash comes whatever node I'm trying to integrate with, in this case, inventory. Okay, so this is our base URL. This is going to be applied every single time, and to that we're going to add nodes. Okay, the base request method, you're going to see we're going to set the request method at each of the different endpoints. So it's not as important to set it at the header. I just set it to get just by default. Okay, this though is pretty important. JSON or XML. So Most REST connections I've been working with recently have all been returning JSON, which is great. It's a little easier to work with than XML, in my personal opinion, but we can support XML APIs as well. Okay, so either of those is an option too. You just need to decide which one you're getting back. And again, when we make the request to them, are we passing in text, JSON, XML? Again, normally I'm seeing it in as JSON, out as JSON. Lastly, we identify what is the authentication method for this API, and that's going to be driven by your API in particular. Now, in our case, you're going to see when we get to headers, we're not using one of their traditional authentication methods. This one is actually using its own authentication. Okay. So that's defining the base. Okay. Next, we can pass in any parameters that we need to pass in. So if they have any standard parameters, you'll see later that we do use parameters on one of the endpoints. Okay, and any headers that we have to pass in, any headers that we have to pass in are here. So here's the authorization one, for example. I'm going to close that without saving that. Hopefully you guys didn't write that down. Okay, after we go to headers, we do have the ability to deal with paging. Now, paging is a big deal because a lot of APIs, especially APIs that are returning large data sets, are limiting how much records you can return on a page. So, for example, there's one that I work with called Teamwork that limits it to 100 records per page. So if the query that you post sends back 1,000 records, it's actually sending back 10 pages of 100 records each. So we can actually here say, that's going to be 100 records, or maybe they're returning a next page link with their data set, a next page number. So whatever the type of paging is that's used for your API, we should be able to support it. And what that means is you don't have to code for scrolling through pages. We've already done that. Okay. Now, groups. Groups allow you to classify your endpoints. It's really just meant to make your end users' lives a little bit easier. Okay, so if you take a look at the actual endpoint document or the API documentation that I showed you, they've got it broken out by, for example, inventory methods. So I have a group called inventory. Okay, further down, we've got customer methods. Nope, further up, we've got customer methods. And there's only one there. Okay, so it's just a way of grouping the endpoints in a way that makes sense to you. It's completely custom. Okay, the next two things we have to identify are service entities and service actions. Service entities are usually the ones that return data. Okay, so they're your gets, where service actions are the ones that push data. So they're your put or your push, I think is the other one. Okay, so let's take a look at the entity first. So we've got this inventory entity right here. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is give it a name and assign it to a group. So that's what the user is going to see. Okay, next we have to give it what is the endpoint and request method. So again, if we go back to our document, you can see here that our request method is a get. And everything before the question mark is the endpoint. Okay, and again, I'm showing you the documentation I have for this one. Your documentation for whatever REST connection you're setting up may look a little bit different. Okay, so here's our REST service, and here's our get. Okay, when we go to our fields, we're going to identify what all fields are part of this and what are the data types. Now, I actually loaded this from a file using their sample. Okay, so I can take a look at their response object documentation, and they've actually got a sample of what the body will look like. So I simply saved this to a file and imported it directly. Okay, and when I did do that import, it brought it in looking like this. Okay, for those For cases where you don't have a documentation that provides you a body sample, which does happen, what you could do is use something like Postman, which is a free utility available, I believe, from Google. And Postman will allow you to make the call and get back a sample body that you could then import. Just saves you a little bit of typing and some mouse clicks. Okay, you do have the ability down here to add a calculated field. For example, if your connector brought back a first name and a last name field and you just wanted a full name field, you could use this to concatenate those two fields. Okay, so it allows you to start to mix and match. Again, if you had an extended line amount and an extended line cost and you wanted a gross margin field, you could add that here as well. Okay, so you do have the ability to add different calculated fields. Okay, and those become part of your data source. Passing in parameters. So you can see here, if you guys remember from our sample, let's go back on our sample. In their call, they've got this filter equals none, or you can have filter equals a specific item number. Okay, so everything after the question mark is a parameter. So here we've added filter equals none. Okay. Lastly, if you do need headers that are specific to this particular node endpoint, you can add them there. All right, so that's setting up our service entity, which is our get. Okay, setting up our service actions, which is our put or our push, is very similar, with just a couple changes. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this guy. This is our push. Now the key difference, you might notice we have fields and we have child entities. Okay, now if you guys remember, excuse me, when we used this as a data destination, we had the customer node and we had the shipping addresses node that were available to us. Okay, the shipping addresses is a child entity within our JSON. Okay, now again, I got the body, a copy of the body from their website, but if you take a look, we've got all of our customer fields within the body, and then we've got the addresses as a list within our JSON. Okay, to do that, what we did was we set up fields for all of the main fields within the node. Okay, then we set up our child entity, which is here, which when we edit it, it actually ends up looking very similar. It's got its own fields that we set up here and its own body that we set up here. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're mapping the fields that we've set up into our body, then we're mapping our child entity's body into the main JSON file's body. Okay, so again, we set up the fields, we show the body, then we can go to our parent, set up these fields, and when we look at that whole thing as a body, it looks like this. Okay. Again, we have the ability to add parameters. Excuse me. I haven't seen a lot of parameters used in the case of a put, but we also have the ability to add headers. Okay, so that's really all it takes to setting up a service action. Now, you may have noticed when we were under service entities, there was a customer entity and there was an item. There are cases where a single API can be used as both a source and a destination. Okay, sometimes you're pushing into it, sometimes it's returning data. It just depends on what verb you put in front of it. Okay, in those cases, what you're going to do is create the entity, which is the get. Okay, then you're going to come into service actions, and you can actually associate your entity action with the original entity. Okay, so that way your get can also become a put. Again, that's going to depend on how your API developer has set up the API, and their documentation should be pretty clear on what's what. Okay, so that is what it takes to set up a REST connection within SmartConnect.com. I did notice that Tim has put the Postman downloads, which is www.postman.com/downloads. I wasn't able to copy and paste it into the general thing, but Postman is there as free. It's wildly useful when you're working with APIs. Okay, at this point, do you guys have any questions on setting up a REST connection within SmartConnect.com? All right then, if you will allow me, I'm going to pop back into our PowerPoint presentation. We've only got a couple more slides to get through, and then hopefully we can get you all back to your day. All right. As far as resources go, we do have some kind of a growing list of REST connections that we've set up for folks. We're looking at turning those into templates. But as far as SmartConnect itself goes, we do have a number of templates out there available for you to use as starting points. If you go to smartconnect.com and go to Integration Solutions, you'll be able to locate all kinds of integration starting points, templates. Available to you as well, as far as resources go for next steps, there are billable services available to you, okay, in various degrees. And then there is support. We do allow unlimited support. 1 year is an option, or you can pay as you go, which falls under the services category. Okay. I mentioned before that SmartConnect is available and can be deployed 2 different ways. It can also be purchased 2 different ways. The first way is perpetual. That's where there's a one-time purchase and an annual enhancement fee. That gets you unlimited connections and unlimited integrations, but you're limited to the on-premise product. Okay, so what does that include? SmartConnect Data Integration. The add-in for Excel is included in that base fee. You can have up to 4 instances of SmartConnect. So a lot of on-premise companies will have a production, a QA, and maybe a development instance. You can have SmartConnect in each of those. Okay. All available connectors are available to you, and we do not do anything that is per user based. So you get an unlimited number of users. And again, those templates that I mentioned earlier at smartconnect.com. All right, next you can buy it as a subscription license. Okay, we do have 4 levels, which drives really the number of connections and the amount of support that is available to you. Okay, so these are the 4 levels here. What's included in those? You do get dual use rights, so you can use the on-prem product or you can use the cloud-based product. You do get the add-in for Excel, which works with both of those, just so you know. So the add-in for Excel can execute maps either in the cloud product or the on-premise product. You get the same number of connectors as you have subscribed to. Again, we don't do anything user-based, so you get an unlimited number of users and you do get access to the templates. Okay, there are a number of training options. Mick, I do see you have a couple questions there. I'm just going to come back to those in a second. Okay, so the SmartConnect training options available to you. We do have CRM self-paced training. We also have public online training. We actually had a bit of a conflict with one of those. You guys were unaware of it, but this same webinar slot was booked for some online training, which we were unaware of. So We won. You guys didn't have to reconnect to anything different, so congratulations, way to go. But that public online training happens pretty regularly, and it's on a number of topics, more in depth than the one that we just did. Okay. You can do private training either online or in person. To be honest, it's more common to do it online these days. Same amount of training, way less travel expense.